Are you there?
I'm here, Gavin. How are you?
I'm good. What the fuck is going on? What? I don't understand.
In Nova Scotia or just the world generally is my question.
Well, that's a bit too big of a bite, but let's just nibble on Nova Scotia. The biggest slaughter in Canadian history. He must have spent months making that fake cop car because it looks perfect. And then he goes... I understand that, like, I read your article. I understand that there's some disgruntled ex in there. Yeah, you kill your ex-wife. We all do. But then just randomly shooting people for 62 miles? This is the most confusing thing.
And the biggest confusion is the fact this guy doesn't seem to fit your usual mass shooter profile. 51-year-old white guy by the name of Gabriel, a.k.a. Gabe Wortman, a denturist, which is a type of dentist. They make dentures for a living in the most rural, the most smallest of small towns in Nova Scotia. Now, I know you know what that is, Gavin, but for your audience, we're talking about the rural sticks of Canada, so to speak. These are people who live in towns who all know each other. They've known each other for generations. Yeah. And this is where, you're more likely to have your neighbors bake you a pie than set your house on fire. That's for darn sure. So what happened was this weekend, Buddy goes into a rampage just before midnight on Saturday night and proceeds for the next 12 hours dressed up in an RCMP uniform. We don't know if it was a real or a fake uniform because, well, he was killed and police have only told us so much about the specifics, let alone the motives. And he's got, I believe, 2 different mock-up cruisers, i.e., from my understanding from the press conferences and the news circulating, these were cop cars that had been retired that he purchased, and then usually they take the decals off, that sort of stuff. He had remade them as you would, like toy soldiers or whatever, to look like the authentic stuff. And so he basically goes on this murderous tirade for over 12 hours. He begins by killing his ex, either wife or girlfriend, her new lover. And there's 16 crime scenes in about 100 kilometers, about 16 miles of stretch of Nova Scotia, where 16 crime scenes, 6 houses have been burnt down. And the reason why the death toll keeps on rising, we're at about 19 right now, is because 6 of those crime scenes were burnt down houses, including his own. And so they keep on finding more and more remains of people in there. And Gavin, what's getting me the most about this story, besides the lack of motive that's being expressed to us, which I'm sure we'll get to in a second, is the stories of the people who have been killed. Gavin, these people are just average kind of Joe Six-Packs or local heroes, nurses, RCMP officers, junior school teachers that have been killed seemingly indiscriminately. And in one case, at least we know about, he executed parents in front of their children. So this is beyond horrific. This is beyond a lasting impact on a community. It's definitely sent shockwaves through the country.
Am I greedy to want to know the motive immediately? This is where I start to get conspiratorial. We have, digital footprints of everyone. We always know motives right away. And then there's these strange cases like Vegas still boggles the mind. We know nothing about Vegas. And remember what that mosque shooting from a few years ago that you went and investigated? And I distinctly remember there was a brown person, I think he was a Muslim, and the white kid. They both were involved in the shooting. And then he just vanished from the picture, and it was one white kid.
Well, I can't talk about that anymore because last time I did, I was dubbed a, conspiracy theorist across the entire country for daring to report the facts as they emerge, even though, of course, they're incredibly fluid situations with an active shooter situation or, one of these mass murders. But no, it's not greedy to want to know the motive. In today's day and age, we're used to people having at least some sort of social media or at least some sort of, written manifesto, even if it's a damn page, for us to know why the hell you would go in the middle of a quarantine and pandemic as a well-educated, white-collared, white-skinned boomer male and go start shooting indiscriminately in a small town in rural Canada. I don't think that that's selfish or greedy whatsoever. It's what's expected. And because of the lack of motive, it leads people to go down conspiracy alley and start to say, is this some sort of MK Ultra? We don't know, like plot to take away our guns. We all know Trudeau wants to come for our guns. And unironically, he does want to come for our guns. And you will see him start to make gestures and overtures to essentially be opportunistic rather, about this situation. Look, it's either the guy had a mental illness that we don't know about still. He is going to be fashioned to be a right-wing conspiracy nut job, which you already see the media and politicians starting to do, because wait for it, Gavin, the guy flew an American flag outside of his house. Therefore, as the Saskatchewan Herald put it, the guy is a Caucasian terrorist, a right-wing Caucasian terrorist, because he flew the national flag of our ally and neighbor. So, I mean, I shouldn't be laughing about it, but I mean, it's quite the leap. If I were to say something remotely similar to that, just the inverse, people would call me a Looney Tune. So mental illness, right-wing conspiracy nut, which is what we're seeing them push for right now. One possibility that I would explore, Gavin, as simple and perhaps low IQ as it sounds, did the guy just go postal during quarantine? Is this a pandemic lockdown pushing some people who might have had predispositions to various sorts of, neuroses, etc., to go over the edge and live out some sort of psychotic evil fantasies? Because we know that at times of recession, etc., things like violent crimes, things like homicides, like suicides, all start to spike. And so there is no doubt going to be more violent crime. And is this just, I don't want to say a statistic, but is this just a bellwether of things to come? So certainly a lot of questions, but with the lack of information to be given by the RCMP or authorities, you can't blame people for starting to get conspiratorial. If there's no there, then let us know at least where you're at, as opposed to being completely mum on it as if the motive doesn't matter, because people will start to input their own agenda. Yeah,
I had my conspiracy for a while was that someone was trying to make guns more illegal in Canada, if that's possible. But because it worked in New Zealand, right? I don't know if that was what the guy was going for, but he wanted there to be a gun crackdown, so there'd be a revolution. They just got the gun crackdown part, but the idea that they'd train this super soldier into being a mass killer just to make guns look bad, that seems absurd. I like your theory much better, that pandemics and forced quarantine has consequences, and the left wants this to go till August. And
or
we're going to see more
beyond.
We're going to see more people
top scientists. Yes, top scientists are saying till 2021. Justin Trudeau keeps on kicking the can, and it's kind of hilarious because we've got these media people who are telling us, stay inside and it saves lives. Meanwhile, they're exempt from staying inside. We've got politicians who are slowly starting to return to Parliament in my country of Canada. We're saying staying inside, it saves lives. Meanwhile, what about normal people who have to pay bills? Pay for their cars, pay for their houses, just do simple things like get milk for their kids. And it's become this whole situation. And look, maybe the guy was, and I'm not excusing, I'm trying to find a motive, which is something that any natural person, especially someone who works in media, would be doing right now. Maybe he had this ex and the ex had a new lover and he was there quarantined by himself. And it just started to make him crazy that she was with this guy and he was by himself. And, he's looking around. He says, I've got this cruiser. I've got this uniform. I've got these firearms. Let's have at her. And so
but wait a minute. Mm-hmm. That makes sense until we go back and we went, it takes months to make a fake cop car and get all the decals correct.
Totally, which suggests that it's not any sort of mental illness or a mental break, unless it was just a matter of happenstance. Like you can have a legally acquired firearm and then snap and then use something that was supposed to be for other purposes, for bad purposes. And I would argue maybe he did. Again, I don't know. I'm not a crime psychologist. All I know is from the sources I have talked to, from cops, from people who are shoe leather journalists who have very good relations with cops, is that everything right now is gossip. The only sort of indication we have of any sort of motive is this damn American flag that was flying outside of his house. Besides that, the guy, is a serial arsonist. We don't even know how many people were really shot versus how many people were burned alive inside their homes. Jesus. Don't forget the vast majority of this murder spree happened between midnight and 12 p.m. the next day. So most people were getting burned alive and shot in the middle of the night. So So it's insane. And also, what happened to the Canadian police response? Why did it take 12 hours in a rural town to find a guy who was driving in, a very specific type of car? I understand that perhaps his victims would have, found it hard to discern him from the real guys, but the real guy should have been able to figure out who it was. And I'm sorry I don't have more answers for you, Gavin, but we as Canadian people don't have any answers right now. So all I've got are a million different questions firing on all cylinders. And I want to know answers before our politicians and liberal do-gooders start to find solutions to problems that don't exist, i.e. more gun control in a country that is already completely slapped and up. We've got gun control up our rear ends. Okay. So we don't need any more gun control. What we do need to know is this guy's motive.
Faith, you did a great job with that mosque shooting. You were the only one to discover that something was up with that. And I had you on this show to explain what happened with that shooting. You provided no information. Now we have more questions than when we started. You've been a complete disappointment. You let me down. You let my viewers down. And you let North America down. You let all of Canada down and all of America down. What's that? 370 million people. That's the worst. That's more of a catastrophe.
You want a job for the Toronto Star? That sounds like a real Toronto Star byline for Faith Goldy there.
Yeah, I just wrote an article for the Toronto Star about Faith Goldy.
You're welcome, journalists. Okay, God bless you, Gavin.
Thanks for coming on.
My pleasure.